This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned. We are here to bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we welcome Erica Molina, the CAP and PABSS Program Director here at Disability Rights New York. She's also the chair of our Committee on Advancing Racial Equality, otherwise known as C.A.R.E, as well as DRNY's PAIR and PAIMI Director, Marc Fliedner. We're here to talk about bystander training and what we can do as allies for the Asian and Asian American and Pacific Islander community, otherwise known as AAPI. Erica, Marc, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
First, let's talk about what's been happening throughout the pandemic and COVID-19 to the AAPI community. Erica, let's start with you. Can you talk to us about, in general terms, how this type of targeted violence is affecting the AAPI community?
Sure. Well, generally, I'll say first is that, unfortunately, biases and prejudices against any community, including the AAPI community, is nothing new. This is certainly something that the community has had to deal with, and that others perhaps have only recently heard of or have been recently learning about. I will say that for myself, I don't identify personally as AAPI, but certainly there are very similar parallels between some of the violence and some of the experiences those in that community are experiencing when compared to others that we saw highlighted similar in the Black and Brown communities as well. Generally, I can say that, again, this is nothing new, but what we know is that so many prejudices come from not knowing. They come from ignorance. They stem from ignorance first and foremost. So early on during the COVID pandemic, we did start hearing and seeing some very vocal and very obvious statements against the Asian and Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, specifically because back then the reports were starting from Asia, from China. That's where the COVID virus first was spotted perhaps, and it stemmed from there and obviously spread globally. Some folks took that opportunity to blame the Asian community for the virus itself, which is obviously incorrect. It's not a correct or very appropriate presumption to make. Again, it's an uninformed and uneducated statement or belief to hold. And unfortunately, even though that's the case, since then, some folks across our community here in the United States have held on to that bigotry and to those prejudices. So right now we're seeing an obvious increase, a very visible increase in Asian American hate crimes, violence toward the Asian American community, including the shooting that did take place just a couple of weeks ago. So it is something that Disability Rights New York stands against and will be calling out.
And Marc, as Erica has been talking about, we are seeing violence in major cities across the country. And as she said, most recently in Atlanta. And right now there's a call to action, and we're talking about everyday allies. We're seeing people in different communities coming together, having rallies, having marches, speaking out. And whether you're a person on the street or on the subway or on a bus or at the market, or, we're not in that many public settings all together anymore, but certainly we are together as communities. What can people do who may be witnessing violence, whether it's verbal or physical? We are the bystanders. And Marc, I know you just attended that bystander training workshop. What are some things that you learned about? What are some things that we can offer to our audience that you may have heard about that we can do?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it's such a troubling time that we're in. I'm sitting in New York City as we have this conversation. I'm a member of an advisory committee to the New York City Mayor's Office of Prevention of Hate Crimes, and we get notices every time that there is a hate crime that's been reported by the police department. I cannot tell you the numbers coming in against Asian Americans, and it's so disheartening to see unfold literally on your laptop every day. So I've really wanted to get involved in this conversation, and I think that One thing that we can do that's pretty simple, we can do it by social media or we can do it on the street, is to simply identify ourselves as allies, like we do when other, individual groups in our community are being targeted for some irrational reason. And then I did attend this training because, there is for a lot of different reasons that we could discuss at length, members of the AAPI community have been historically and traditionally a little bit reluctant to access government and to access the police. And so that if we see something happening that looks like it could develop into a hate crime or even just an act of, I guess what we would refer to as bullying against somebody from the AAPI community, to act as bystanders in the context of interrupting it, if we can do so safely, and reporting it, because sometimes members of the community will not be inclined to report because of that historical context that I referenced. And that doesn't mean that an eyewitness to an event can't report it, so that we can keep track of all these terrible things happening and try and get to the root of the problem by getting some good data on how many people are impacted.
And Erica, you and I just had a great talk about what being an ally means. I think that we hear the word ally a lot, whether it is through social media or in the news, and how people want to show that they're an ally. And when you shared with me that being an ally is action, that really landed on me in a great way. I thought, wow, that is true. Ally, and being an ally as action is something that we should be looking at. What does that look like for the everyday person to be an ally and to be in action in that way?
Sure, Katrin, and you're absolutely right. Ally is something that needs to be acted upon. You can certainly identify yourself as an ally to any marginalized community or any community that is being targeted, and in this particular situation, the AAPI community. What an ally truly is someone who acts against these prejudicial, ill-informed, ignorant, or bigoted words and actions and violence. To be an ally is definitely to act in those situations. What an ally is not, and I'll give you just a very simple example. What being an ally is not, for instance, is simply liking a post on social media that called out Asian American violence, for example, but then doing nothing about it, not having conversations about it, not educating yourself about it, not educating others about it as necessary. It needs to go beyond simply something performative, a performative action that perhaps highlights you, perhaps you're highlighting yourself as an ally. But again, that in itself is simply self-serving action. You have to do that and then more in order to truly be an ally to any community. So what that might look like is, again, researching, doing lots of reading and self-education on where these issues stem from, why they're happening, and to the extent that someone may already be informed about those instances or that education, that background, and understanding what actually is happening and why it is happening the way it is, the next step would be to educate, to call people out when they are saying something that is prejudicial or ignorant, perhaps something that perhaps mischaracterizes the Asian community, or again, any other marginalized community. To be an ally is not only to identify yourself as someone who doesn't use those phrases or those words or take those actions and or act on violence, toward a certain community. It is also that when somebody does use harsh words or ignorant words, to actually call them out and say, what do you think you mean when you say this particular slur, or why would you use that language? It can be as small as just around your dining room table with your family in the evening, perhaps just entering into that discourse and seeing how far you can get in terms of talking with others and seeing where these beliefs come from. And it's uncomfortable, it is, but it's important work. Researching, education, self-education. It's about being uncomfortable, calling others out when you know that something is not right. It's important to keep in mind to only do so when you're physically safe. And I think that may be something that Marc may be able to speak to as well through his bystander training.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought up the safety component of it. In the silence or the politeness is something that will get uncomfortable. And it is something that when you are being an ally, there are so many things to also consider, and safety is one of them, and what is happening in the whole situation. So I agree. Mark, is there anything that you heard in your training that would speak to that, specifically around when, as bystanders, we are being witness to, whether it's violence through speech or physical violence and racism? What do we do, and how do we look at the safety of a situation when and if responding?
Well, first of all, it's really good to have these conversations in advance, right? So that you are really very conscious of what action you're taking if you find yourself in such a situation. Because the inclination would be for somebody who is angered by what they're seeing to just act, in kind of a knee-jerk way. And that really isn't appropriate, because the reality is, if we initiate something under unsafe circumstances for us, for the person who may be being victimized, and for everybody else around us, then we can end up doing more harm than good. So there's this need for us, sadly, that we have to acquire this in this moment in time, but the need for us to immediately be aware of our surrounding circumstances. If we're talking about reporting, can we safely report right there, or do we need to step to somewhere else that is more safe, or ask someone else to do it for us? How do we prioritize the needs? I mean, surely if there is a person that is being actively harmed and it's still taking place, then I find that a lot of us would be compelled to try and stop it. But we've got to take into consideration, do the individuals that are perpetrating this action, are they armed? Are they in a position to be able to harm us or the person that's being victimized in a way that's going to make matters worse? It's this conscious action. And it's really interesting that we're evolving that way as a culture. I don't know, frankly, if 20 years ago, did we have cell phones 20 years ago? If before cell phones existed, if we would have thought the idea of holding up our camera and recording something would be safe. And maybe it wasn't at first, because frankly, I've observed police officers and others not liking it when they're recorded. And certainly if somebody's harming somebody, they don't want the crime to be recorded. But we have to even consider, when is it safe to pull up that camera? When is it safe to take a photo? When is it safe to video? And these are going to be unique to each and every circumstance. So we have to be sort of hyper aware of our surroundings. It's asking a lot of us, but when people are under siege, like our brothers and sisters in the AAPI community are right now, unfortunately, there's a necessity to be prepared in the ways that I'm describing.
And as we are seeing, people coming together, and our communities are trying to support, being supportive of marginalized communities, we have to look also to the leaders of those communities. And what are some things that we could hope to see coming from our community leaders to show commitment to change, to show commitment to really looking at what's happening in our communities and ensuring that the work is going to start getting done? I certainly don't want to say ensuring that change is going to happen, because we have a long way to go, but ensuring that there's a commitment to doing the work. What can we expect, or what should we look for to our leaders for this?
Erica touched on these things before. It's about education. It's about coming straight out and saying what's being asserted about, oh my goodness, where the virus came from or where any problem came from is based on completely unfactual, inaccurate information. And buying into these things is exposing ignorance. It's community leaders not only taking it upon themselves to educate themselves about what's right, but also to speak that truth as every opportunity they get to a microphone, which they have more opportunities than we do. And also, frankly, it's sometimes also calling out other policymakers who have made a terrible habit of, using these unfortunate references to the virus that imply that they are, that one group is responsible for them and things like that. And I think it's also the policymakers making a pledge that where there is criminal conduct being committed against folks, or even conduct that continues to marginalize folks, in its repetitive nature, that there's accountability for that. that everybody who's in an opportunity to, the Hate Crimes Task Force of the NYPD, those that who can hold people responsible by lawsuits and things like that, that there be accountability, because the reality is that these kinds of trends don't tend to stop until we unite and find a lot of different creative tools to make them stop.
And I think that's exactly right, Mark. I'm glad that you said those examples of leadership, because that in itself is what it means to be an ally. You take those actions, you call them out, you call for accountability, which is just as important. And just as important as saying that something is wrong or misinformed or incorrect is calling for a correction of that wrong, calling for accountability of a particular action or particular words and particular, there are so many opportunities for that. And I think that once an ally begins doing that research that I talked about, that self-education to the extent that they're not already educated or need to learn a bit more about what really is going on, the more I think that research is done. And it is as simple as just looking online at various resources. It really is that simple. Once you start looking into it, you start identifying opportunities in your day-to-day life to be able to take those actions. And even though we may think of leadership in these issues to be perhaps outside of us or above us in a certain hierarchical way, the truth also is that we can be our own leaders, and we can be leaders in this movement as well, simply by being a part of the positive change, both big but also very small. So I'm glad that you did bring up that leadership aspect. Everybody can take part in it.
I think that's a great way to segue into what DRNY is doing, as having a lot of information to bring to the table, especially around the intersectionality of disability and the AAPI community, and making sure that our information is, in fact, available to them. We talked a little bit about access and what that looks like. And for us, and for my department specifically, we look at access as how many people can we get our information to and have it make an impact on their life. And one of the ways we can do that is ensuring that the languages are available. So I'm going to take this opportunity to put a call to action to anyone who is listening in our audience who needs to have any of our information brought to them in a different language. Please send us some information at contact@DRNY. We are doing our internal work here to assess what languages we can start having information translated into, but we also would love to hear from the community as a whole. And so language access is an issue, and that's something that we try to address on a couple of different levels. And so, Erica or Mark, do either of you want to add to language as an access issue? And how do we address that at DRNY?
Well, I think it's exactly what you just said, Katrin, is that DRNY is taking specific steps, particularly through one of our task forces and through your department, the marketing department, as well as the cultural linguistic competency and outreach task force here at DRNY. That particular group is taking the lead on this project at the moment, as I understand it, with your assistance, of course. And to be clear, we've already begun quite a long time ago in translating many of our resources into different languages, such as Spanish, Chinese, also obviously for the deaf and hard of hearing community, having our the podcasts and other video resources, having to include ASL or American Sign Language interpretation in those as well. That's all language and that's all access. What we want, and what I think you put a good call out there for, is for any particular community who thinks that there would be a benefit possibly taking it a step further and translating into a language that we perhaps haven't gotten to yet, that would be immensely helpful. What we want to make sure that we're doing here at DRNY, serving the disability community first and foremost. And as we know, the disability community is hugely varied and affects everyone every single day. So what we want to ensure is that our resources are reaching everyone that it can. And again, if a community person out there or a group of people or just individuals want to reach out to us and recommend a specific language, especially if they have a certain fact sheet or certain brochure or other publication that they've already seen from us in mind, that would be helpful in spurring us along and making sure that we're translating the right things in the right order and prioritizing as best we can what those communities need from us right now.
Thanks, Erica. That's right. We have started this project, and certainly having as much information as we can get from our audience will help the project be as robust as it can be. So thank you for that. Mark, is there anything you want to add?
I think that my colleague Erica Molina stated it very well. We're always trying to look at the whole person here at DRNY, but these are conscious decisions that we're making as an organization and as individuals. Whether we're serving the clients, whether we're reaching out to clients, we're trying to find in the places where they gather on their terms. And I think it's the antidote to the othering, if you will, that is causing people to call out members of the AAPI community as being separate from them. New York State is anything. It's a very diverse and varied and beautifully, culturally varied community. And we should be looking at that as a positive and not a negative.
That's right. And I will say again, the email address, if you have information for us on specific, whether it's fact sheet or piece of media that you would like to suggest a language for, you can email us at contact@drny.org, and we will list that in the description of this podcast. Erica and Mark, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to talking with you both again soon. Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. Tune in next Wednesday, where we'll bring you more information on disability rights in the state of New York. The closed captioned and ASL version of this podcast is available on our YouTube channel. To listen to more Empire State of Rights closed captioned, follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.